Hello guys, welcome to another episode of Up Ovo podcast. In today's episode, I'm gonna talk about a tough topic. I'm gonna talk about pedophilia. Let's start. Some time ago, when new versions of DSM and ICD were being prepared, a press article was widely published in the media and on social media claiming that pedophilia was a sexual orientation similar to homosexuality or bisexuality. This caused a lot of emotion and even more confusion, so I'll try to break it down and clarify this phenomenon. First of all, let's make it clear from the very beginning. It is not up for discussion that child abuse is unacceptable and wrong. There is no room to defend it or to take another perspective because it is clear and undeniable that violating the sexual autonomy of a child is detrimental to the child's health and well-being, and that's it. There is no discussion here. So if we have it clear, now let's go with something more confusing. Well, pedophilia is confusing because there are actually two ways of understanding it. First, pedophilia can be understood from a psychological perspective. And second, it can be understood from a legal perspective. Starting with the latter, the majority of countries worldwide have something called the age of consent, which means there is a legal age from which a person can consent to have sex with someone of this person's age or someone older. And that older person will not be punished for engaging in sexual intercourse with someone who is already older than or of the age of consent. However, if a person is under the age of consent, even if they consciously agree to have sex with someone, it doesn't matter. The older person will be punished for engaging in sexual intercourse with them, even if both of them agreed. It doesn't really matter. If the person have not yet reached the age of consent, it doesn't matter. This is sometimes referred to as pedophilia, but this definition is based purely on age, and this is usually used usually in jurisdiction context. The age of consent varies. In some countries, it is at least 18. In others, it is at least 16. In some parts of Mexico, it is as low as 12. And in most European countries, it is usually 15 or 16. Now, in psychology, when it comes to pedophilia, age itself is less important. In fact, the diagnosis of pedophilia never relies solely on age. From a psychological standpoint, pedophilia is a mental health disorder characterized by an adult or older teenager having a primary or exclusive sexual attraction to prepubescent children. And according to this definition, pedophilia can be diagnosed when a person is sexually attracted to children who have not yet started puberty. In other words, a pedophile is attracted to children without visible secondary sexual characteristics, such as pubic hair, enlarged breasts, widened hips, or an Adam's apple. The specific age of the children does not matter in this context. However, we know that puberty starts about 11, 12, 13. But in psychological definition, the age is not mentioned. However, there are people who have such a preference, that they are attracted to children, but they do not act on it. They do not masturbate to child pornography, they do not abuse children, or they do not try to interact with children. In other words, they do not act on their preference. On the other hand, there are people who do act on these urges and actively seek sexual interaction with children. And since these two situations are completely different, like two separate universes, the first one seems like a simple preference, while the second is more serious and much closer to the disorder we traditionally think of. Therefore, there was a need to formally distinguish between them. And to address this, recent versions of the diagnostic criteria have introduced a term called pedophilic disorder. This disorder can be diagnosed when a pattern of pedophilic arousal is present, and if someone is attracted to children and this preference is accompanied by either subjective distress, interpersonal difficulty, or having acted on that arousal. And the distinction between these two phenomena and the public discussion around it led to clickbait headlines describing pedophilia as a new sexual orientation. So that's where it comes from. Now, the question is whether we really need this distinction. Why couldn't we just have one definition of pedophilia? Where the problem is that we cannot control our sexual preferences. We simply have them. We're either homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, asexual, or whatever. But what we can control is our behavior. So diagnosing someone who has a pedophilic preference but does not act on it with the same disorder as someone who acts on these urges and engages in child abuse, this would be unfair. That's why we needed this kind of distinguished definition. Well, another question that students often ask is whether pedophilia, either as a preference or behavior, can be treated. Well, this is a very difficult question. And we don't really have strong evidence to support either perspective. But what I always say is that sexual preference is something we are not really able to change. Let's do the quick exercise. I usually do it with students, so let's do it together. Close your eyes, and imagine your perfect partner in terms of sexual preference. Their hair, their eyes, their body. Okay, you get it? Okay. Now, I want you to change your preference, and I want you to be sexually attracted to a fat, bald, old guy with a mustache. Well, is it doable? No, I don't think so. You can't change your preference just like this. And this is exactly what happens when we try to change a pedophilic sexual preference. Well, they tell us that they're sexually attracted, and their sexually attractive object is a prepubescent child, and we tell them, no, you need to be attracted to an adult woman. It doesn't work that way. The only thing we can influence is the behavior. So when dealing with someone who engages in pedophilic behavior, it can feel like trying to overthrow the devil. Well, achieving sexual arousal is one of the strongest and most pleasurable experiences for many people. Like any sexual intercourse, actually. It stimulates a group of neural structures called the reward system. And a rewarding stimulus has been described as, and this is a quotation, any stimulus, object, event, activity, or situation that has the potential to make us approach and consume it. So it's easy to see that if a behavior is stimulating and rewarding, we'll try to repeat it. And this is similar to what happens in the cases of drug addiction, alcohol dependence, gambling, and so on. This is rewarding. So even though it's detrimental, we want to do it more and more. So if we are dealing with a person who has already experienced sexual pleasure from using it, for example, from using child pornography, we face an extremely challenging task. Well, this patient, has already experienced pleasure, and what we are doing is removing this source of pleasure and trying to make them engage in less pleasant behavior. In other words, try to put yourself in their shoes. In other words, they are losing something they once enjoyed. It's not easy, and I can compare it. I always do it. I know it's kind of trivial comparison, but I usually compare it to people on a diet. We tell them that eating chocolate cake is detrimental to their health and that they should eat vegetables instead. But they don't like vegetables. They want to eat chocolate cake because this is what they enjoy. And they may risk obesity or diabetes. They know it, and they know that it is potentially deadly to them. But not everyone will change their dietary habits. And if they don't change their dietary habits, it's up to them. It's their decision. They are aware that this is wrong, but they are aware there will be punishment. And exactly, this is similar to pedophilia to some extent. They know they do wrong, and they know they can control their behavior, and it's up to them if they do it. They can. It's hard, but they can. But it's up to them if they do it. Well, patients with pedophilic disorder are aware that they cause harm, either directly by engaging in sexual behavior with children, or indirectly by using child pornography or voyeuristic behavior. And voyeurism involves being sexually aroused by watching unsuspecting people. For example, hiding near playgrounds to watch children play, and masturbating or not. But whether or not they do so while watching, but regardless, all these activities, whether direct or indirect, are illegal and harmful, and they cross the boundaries of sexual freedom of other people. But they hope that no one will find out. They try to rationalize their behavior, and after experiencing sexual pleasure, they often suffer from guilt, may have suicidal thoughts, may have suicide attempts. They frequently experience social anxiety and depression because they are fully aware, the vast majority of them are fully aware that there is no social acceptance of such preference. And if they admit to having such a preference, they fear being ostracized by society, rejected, beaten, and so on. And the one thing that I'm not gonna break into pieces here is the difference between pedophilic behavior and pedophilic preference. But what I'm describing now is it's purely pedophilic preference, because we have people without pedophilic or primarily pedophilic preference who engage in sexual behavior with children, but this is a completely different situation. Here I am talking about pedophilic disorder and pedophilia, and by this I mean patients who are exclusively or primarily stimulated by sexually by prepubescent children. I'm not talking about people who have other preferences but engage in sexual behaviors with children. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about purely pedophilic preference. And I remember a man who came to the hospital with his mother when I was finishing my master's studies, and still I remember this patient. They were desperately seeking help because they didn't know what to do. And during the interview I conducted, the man told me that the first time he had ever asked for help was when he was 18. He sought advice from a school counselor because he felt something was wrong with him. He wasn't sure what that was, but he knew that something was wrong. He was scared, he was afraid, he was terrified. However, the intervention was disastrous. The counselor reacted harshly, calling him a psycho and deviant, and essentially told him he was sick. Well, which wasn't far from the truth, but he knew that he was sick. But he left him without offering any constructive support. And that was the first and the last time he sought help. And he was so terrified of going to another therapist that he thought it would be better to kill himself than to seek help. And following this thought, he tried to kill himself. Well, he didn't succeed, but he tried to kill himself twice, so he's been diagnosed with depression and so on. But in his several years later, in his early 20s, he tried to build a relationship with a girl. And initially, it went well, but later he realized that during sexual intercourse, he couldn't achieve orgasm. He then began to avoid sexual intercourse due to problems with arousal, and eventually she broke up with him because the relationship had become stagnant. And after a few years of alcohol and substance abuse and recurrent episodes of depression, he decided to talk to his mother and ask for support. And this woman, who was a single mother, this woman was determined enough to travel several hundred miles to seek help, which is how they ended up in this ward, this hospital. And if I have learned one thing from this story, it is that you should never dismiss a pedophilic patient. Never. This disclosure might be their very first attempt at seeking help. And if you dismiss or scare them away, they may never reach out for help again. And they will not only hurt themselves, but they will very likely hurt other people or children. So if you are a therapist or a counselor and are unsure how to handle such a patient, don't leave them without support. Telling you about their preferences was possibly the bravest decision of their life. So therefore, please try to find someone who can help and ensure the patient does not go without assistance. And speaking of therapy, it is extremely difficult to assess its effectiveness because each patient starts from different position. Some patients are already imprisoned, some have not yet engaged in sexual behaviors, and others use child pornography. And since each patient is at a different stage, evaluating the effectiveness of therapy, given this variability, is nearly impossible. However, there are established methods for therapy. The main treatments for pedophilia include cognitive behavioral therapy, medications that reduces sexual desire, or a combination of these approaches. I will describe the therapy in detail in a future episode, but for now I will say that continuous cognitive behavioral therapy is generally considered the most effective treatment for pedophilia. And nonetheless, a single type of treatment may not work for everyone, as the effectiveness can vary depending on the individual's specific situation. And regarding medication, we know that testosterone plays a role in regulating sexuality and aggression, and while there is no evidence that pedophilic patients have abnormally high levels of testosterone, anti-androgen therapy is believed to reduce sexual urges. So anti-androgen drugs work by blocking androgen activity at the receptor level, which significantly lowers testosterone production, and in consequence, it reduces sexual arousal and sexual urges. And I believe that's all what I wanted to tell you about pedophilia and pedophilic disorder. This was very briefly described, but I believe that's fair enough for now. And I will try to break it into detail in future episodes, because this is really, really tough topic. So I think smaller chunks of knowledge is enough here. So thank you for listening to this episode. And of course, you can follow me on my social media. You can reach out if you want to get in touch. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And I wish you a nice weekend. Take care. Bye bye. Until next time.